Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that's kind of, well, it's everywhere, right? Innovation.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth asking, what does that actually mean? And how does it change when we're thinking about like tech stuff versus art versus, business? We've got a really interesting collection of sources here, and I'm hoping we can use them to pick apart some of the little differences, and I think even more interesting, see if there's some common threads running through all of these different areas. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, innovation. It's one of those buzzwords, right? It seems like everyone's using it for everything the newest phone, a pinking that looks like nothing you've ever seen before, a
Yeah.
company that just like flips an industry on its head. What we want to do today is go a little deeper than just the hype. We want to see if we can figure out what really makes innovation tick in each of these areas and really use this material you've gathered to guide us.
Perfect. Let's jump right in. So, first up, technological innovation. Our sources are pretty clear on this one. It's a big deal, especially if a company like wants to stay ahead of the game. At its core, it's about using new methods, new tech to solve, human problems, things people are struggling with. But it's more than just the, aha moment, the light bulb going off. It's that whole process of going from the idea all the way to actually making it happen, new products, services, ways of doing things better, even totally new ways of running a business, and the impact of all that. Like it's huge. It changes how we live every day. It changes society. It changes how companies work. I mean, just think about how different healthcare is now or how we communicate. Even just like getting around is totally different because of technological innovation.
Yeah, and one of the definitions we have here from Statistics Finland, it describes technological innovation as, well, a new or significantly improved product or process. It says these have to have different technological characteristics and that they should, lead to some specific advantages. What I find really interesting is how much emphasis the sources put on the role of market demand, what people are actually looking for, and also things like social and environmental factors, and even just improving the processes that already exist. Like it's not always about these huge breakthroughs. Sometimes it's those smaller changes that add up to something big. It's this constant cycle, like you said, from the first spark of an idea all the way to making it real, selling it. And that's often driven by entrepreneurs, those
Mhm.
risk takers. And of course, you need people working together, collaborating to really make it happen.
Totally. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about artistic innovation. Here, it seems like the focus is on using new techniques, new materials in a creative way. And those can come from within the art world itself, artists trying new things. Or they can come from advances in technology in other areas that artists then start to use in their work. We're talking about like new methods, new ways of seeing things, new artistic forms, and even integrating tech in ways that haven't been done before. And this applies whether we're talking about someone reinterpreting a classic style or a contemporary artist pushing the boundaries with digital tools or even like organic materials, things you wouldn't expect.
It's true. And what's really striking to me is the sheer breadth of what artistic innovation covers, according to these sources.
Yeah.
You see this embrace of like really unconventional materials. Digital platforms are a big one, but even like biological stuff, industrial elements. And there's this blurring of the lines between different fields, what they call interdisciplinary approaches. So art intersecting with digital tech, biology, even sociology. And then you have these emerging technologies like VR, AI, 3D printing, all of them opening up completely new avenues for artistic expression and even how audiences experience art. It's not just that passive thing anymore.
And, it's interesting that with artistic innovation, it often feels like the concept, like the underlying idea, is more important than just how it looks. It's about making people think differently, sparking conversation, seeing the world in a new way. The sources even talk about taking something traditional, especially in performing arts, and doing something completely unexpected with it. Or even artists setting their own rules, their own limitations, to force themselves to be creative in a new way. So in the end, it's often seen as like taking a step forward within an existing tradition, but making it new.
Yeah, I think that idea of building on tradition in a new way is really important. It's not always about a complete break from the past. And it's worth mentioning the growing connection the sources highlight between science and art. Like science can give artists new tools, new materials, but artistic thinking can also inspire new perspectives, new ways of solving problems in science. They feed off each other.
That makes sense. All right, let's shift gears one more time and talk about business innovation. So, in this context, it seems like it's not enough to just have a good idea. It's about being able to actually develop that idea, deliver it, and scale it up in a way that really drives growth. Like at the end of the day, it's about finding new ways to create value. And this is presented in our sources as a whole process, from that first concept all the way to like how it impacts the market. It requires a structured approach to both creating and marketing truly innovative products or services.
And, consistently, the sources emphasize a few key things. Finding a need in the market that's not being met, coming up with a solution that really addresses that need,
Mm.
and having a business model that's sustainable, that can actually bring that solution to a lot of people. We also see these different flavors of business innovation: incremental, which is more about continuous improvement; radical, which is like huge leaps forward; disruptive, which creates a whole new market; and architectural, which is about using existing technologies in new ways to reach new customers.
So, across all three areas, technology, art, and business, what we keep seeing is this emphasis on novelty, doing something new or improving on something that exists. And that's always tied to creating some kind of value, whether that's economic, social, artistic, or even just functional. But as we've seen how it gets triggered, the process, and what that innovation actually looks like in the end, can be pretty different depending on the field. Actually, we've put together a little table one, that pulls all these definitions together. You can check it out in the show notes. It shows both the things they have in common and the key differences. But okay, let's move from the what to the who. What kind of people are behind these innovations? What's the mindset?
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. If you look at our sources, they seem to suggest that innovators, whether they're scientists, artists, or business leaders, they often share certain traits, certain ways of thinking. And it's these things that allow them to see the world differently, to come up with these truly original solutions.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What are some of those key characteristics?
Well, one that comes up a lot is continuous reflection. So being willing to question your own assumptions, your own ideas all the time. And then there's this idea of unattached exploration. So being able to consider all these possibilities without getting, too attached to one too early. And they're also really good at moving between big picture thinking and the nitty-gritty details. And importantly, they're not just thinkers, they're doers. They're action-oriented. They want to get those ideas out there, test them, experiment.
Makes sense. What else?
Well, they're often very opportunity-focused. Like they can see potential even in tough situations. Mental resilience is a big one too, because, setbacks happen. You got to be able to bounce back. And something that seems really important is intellectual humility. That means being open to learning, admitting when you don't know something. And of course, courage. You got to be willing to go against the grain, to embrace the risk of failing.
Right. And the sources also talk a lot about passion, that fire that keeps them going, especially when things get tough, and persistence, not giving up easily. They've got to be resourceful too, finding ways to make things happen even when they don't have a lot of resources. And they're definitely not afraid to challenge the status quo. They encourage risk taking, and they try to create environments where new ideas are welcome, even if they sound crazy at first. And a lot of them seem to have this long-term vision. They're patient. And they're always looking for opportunities, always watching for that opening.
It's interesting, too, that while it's not always the case, a lot of innovators have a strong educational background. It seems like that gives them a solid foundation to build on. And then there's this get up and go attitude. They're driven, they're resilient. But it's not just about acting impulsively. They can be very thoughtful and strategic. They do their research. Strong people skills are important too. Emotional intelligence, empathy. It helps them connect with people, understand what they need. And yeah, they're risk takers, but they're also decisive. And crucially, they're curious, flexible, optimistic. Oh, and obviously they've got to have that creative spark.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive list. So it's not just about personality, though, right? There are specific ways of thinking that seem to be common among innovators.
Exactly. So one is associating making connections between things that don't seem related at first. Then there's questioning, always challenging the way things are done. Observing, paying attention to the world around them, looking for problems to solve, opportunities to seize. And then networking, reaching out to people, getting different perspectives, tapping into different areas of expertise, and of course, experimenting, testing things out, trying new approaches. Our sources actually call these 5 things the innovator's DNA.
The innovator's DNA. I like that. So how do these cognitive abilities work together?
Well, it seems like that natural curiosity leads to questions, which then leads to more focused observation and a willingness to actually get your hands dirty and experiment. Networking gives them the raw material, so to speak, different viewpoints, different bits of information. And their ability to connect seemingly unrelated things then allows them to synthesize all that into something new, something innovative.
I see. And our sources also talk about divergent thinking, coming up with lots of different potential solutions fueled by that endless curiosity and a passion for their ideas. It's like contagious. Stamina is important too, that ability to keep going when things get tough. And they're often really good leaders that can inspire people to get behind their vision. They
Mhm.
also tend to have a lot of respect for other innovators and what they've accomplished. And they're not afraid to ask questions, to admit when they don't know something. They see failure as a learning opportunity, not the end of the world. And, they're always learning, always growing. We've actually got another table for you, table 2, that summarizes all these traits and abilities. There are even some quotes from the sources to give you a better feel for what they mean. But okay, let's move on from the mindset and talk about the methods. How do innovators actually structure their creative process? What kind of approaches do they use?
Right. So now we're moving from the individual to the systems, the frameworks that people can use to support innovation. And the sources point to several methodologies that can really help guide the process. One of the most well-known is design thinking. And this is all about putting the user at the center. You really focus on understanding their needs, and then you develop solutions based on that understanding. And you do it iteratively, meaning you keep refining it based on feedback.
So, I've heard of design thinking. How does it actually work?
Well, there are usually 5 stages. First, you empathize. You really try to understand your user's needs through observation, interviews, things like that. Then you define the problem, but you do it from the user's perspective. Then comes ideate. You brainstorm as many potential solutions as you can without judging them right away. Then you prototype. You create a simple version of your idea to test it out. And finally, you test it with real users and use their feedback to improve it. And it's important to remember that this isn't always a straight line. You might go back and forth between stages as you learn more.
Got it. So it's all about that back and forth, that constant learning and refining. And the sources say design thinking can be used in lots of different areas: business strategy, community issues, developing new tech. It's a way to reduce uncertainty and make sure you're actually solving the right problem. But they also point out that it can take a lot of time and resources, and it might be hard to implement in really big, complex organizations.
Exactly. Now, another interesting methodology is lateral thinking. And this one is quite different from the more, logical step-by-step approaches. Lateral thinking is about coming up with creative solutions by looking at problems from unexpected angles. Edward de Bono, he's the guy who really popularized this idea.
Lateral thinking. Okay. What kind of techniques are we talking about here?
Well, there's things like random stimulation. You intentionally introduce something unrelated, like a word or an image, to spark new connections in your mind. You actively try to come up with different ways of looking at the problem, not just the obvious ones. You use techniques like reversing relationships, breaking down patterns, even trying to think of the wrong answer on purpose. The goal is to shake things up, challenge your assumptions, and uncover those hidden possibilities that you might miss if you just think logically.
Interesting. So you're forcing yourself to think outside the box, to see things from a completely different perspective.
Right, and then there's the scientific method. Now, you might think of this as something that only happens in a lab, but the sources point out that this structured approach to inquiry can be really helpful in the innovation process, too.
So how does that work? How do you apply the scientific method to something like, developing a new product or service?
Well, you start by defining the problem you want to solve. Then you come up with potential solutions. These are like your hypotheses. Then you plan out how you're going to test those ideas. You do the testing through prototyping, collecting data, and then you decide how to move forward based on what you've learned. It's all about making decisions based on evidence and that constant cycle of learning and refining, which is really important for reducing the risk of failure when you're trying something new.
Right, because innovation, by definition, is about trying something that hasn't been done before.
Hmm.
So there's always a chance it won't work. But okay, so we've got these 3 different methodologies: design thinking, lateral thinking, and the scientific method, each one with its own strengths. We've actually put together another table, table 3, that summarizes the key principles and techniques of each approach. You can check that out too. But let's move on from theory to practice. Let's look at some real-world examples of innovation in action. And let's start with technological innovation.
Okay, so a great example here is Marie Curie. She's, a legend in science and tech innovation. And her story really highlights how deep scientific understanding and that relentless pursuit of knowledge can lead to groundbreaking discoveries, even when you face huge obstacles.
Absolutely. Our sources emphasize how methodical she was in her work. She meticulously studied radioactivity and different elements, focusing on pitch blende. And because it was so much more radioactive than she expected, she realized there must be some unknown element in there. What followed was this incredibly difficult process of isolating those elements. She worked with her husband, Pierre Curie, using his electrometer to take really precise measurements, and eventually they discovered polonium and radium. And the process they used to purify those elements, recrystallization, it was unbelievably challenging.
Yeah. And what's really important is that she realized the radiation wasn't coming from the compound itself, it was coming from the uranium atom. That completely changed how people understood atoms at the time. And she has this famous quote, "One never notices what has been done, one can only see what remains to be done." And that really captures her drive, her constant focus on moving forward. But she didn't just make discoveries in the lab. During World War I, she used her knowledge to create these mobile X-ray units, what they called little Curies, that could be taken right to the front lines to diagnose injuries.
Wow. So she took existing technology, X-ray machines, generators, and made them portable to solve a really critical problem during the war. And she even trained a team of women to operate the equipment. It's estimated that over 1 million soldiers benefited from her work. And after the war, she continued her research, establishing the Radium Institute. Her legacy is immense. She revolutionized how we understand atoms, and her work has had a profound impact on medicine and technology even today.
Absolutely. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about Steve Jobs and his impact on Apple, particularly after he returned to the company in the late 90s. His approach to innovation was really focused on simplicity and making products that were easy and enjoyable to use.
Right. The sources really highlight his customer-centric strategy, which aligns perfectly with the principles of design thinking. He really believed in understanding the needs of the people who would be using his products and even anticipating needs they didn't even know they had yet. And his emphasis on design wasn't just about making things look pretty, it was about how they functioned, how the whole experience felt. He wanted to create products that were intuitive and effortless to use. He was also known for demanding excellence in execution, streamlining product lines, and building a powerful platform strategy. And he constantly sought feedback from customers through usability testing and other methods.
A great example of this is the swipe to unlock feature on the iPhone. Apparently, the idea came to him when he was on a plane, and he noticed the simple action of locking a bathroom door. And from that everyday experience, his team was able to create this incredibly elegant solution, which completely changed how we interact with our phones. Beyond that, he also played a big role in making USB the standard, popularizing the computer mouse, and pioneering micropayments with iTunes.
It's amazing how he was able to take something so simple, like swiping to unlock, and make it so intuitive and satisfying to use. And it's interesting to see how his design philosophy, this focus on simplicity, connects with what Picasso did with his Bull abstraction series. Remember how he kept simplifying the image, stripping it down to its essence? There's a real parallel there. Okay, let's talk about another big innovator in the tech world, Elon Musk. He seems to be all about tackling those big, seemingly impossible challenges.
It's exactly. A big part of his approach is what he calls first principles thinking. It's basically about breaking down a complex problem into its most basic elements and then reasoning up from there. He even has a 5-step design process. 1, make the requirements less dumb. 2, get rid of any unnecessary parts. 3, simplify and optimize what's left. 4, speed up the cycle time. And 5, automate the process. It's a very lean approach, and he's always questioning assumptions.
And the sources talk about how he fosters an environment where people are constantly intellectually stimulated. He sets these incredibly ambitious goals, what he calls North Star goals, that really push the boundaries. He likes to keep his organizational structures relatively flat so that people can communicate directly and share ideas easily. He's also a big believer in using data to make decisions, and he embraces AI and automation. And his approach to development is very agile and iterative, with rapid prototyping and constant testing. SpaceX's reusable rockets are a great example of this radical innovation that came from his first principles thinking.
So in the world of technology, we've got these very different approaches. Curie, with her rigorous scientific method, Jobs with his focus on the user experience, and Musk with his bold first principles approach. And all of them have led to some truly game-changing innovations. Now, let's turn our attention to the art world and look at some examples of artistic breakthroughs.
All right, when we're talking about artistic innovation, Pablo Picasso's name has got to be at the top of the list. His constant experimentation and his role in developing cubism completely changed the landscape of 20th century art.
His whole career was about breaking free from the traditional ways of representing reality and finding completely new ways to depict it. And you can see that evolution in his earlier blue and rose periods.
Yeah.
But it was his collaboration with Georges Braque on Cubism that was truly groundbreaking. They basically took objects and broke them down into geometric shapes, showing multiple perspectives at the same time. And that was such a radical departure from the idea of a single viewpoint that had dominated art for centuries.
Our sources talk about how Cubism developed through what they call an effectual process. So it was a series of innovations, each building on the previous one. And works like Les Demoiselles d'Avignon were crucial in establishing this new visual language. And Picasso didn't stop there. He kept experimenting with painting, sculpture, ceramics, always pushing the boundaries. Even his self-portraits show how his style evolved within Cubism. And as we mentioned earlier, there's a connection between his later work, where he focused on simplifying images, and Steve Jobs' approach to design. They both believed in stripping things down to their essence.
So in art, innovation often means challenging the established conventions, experimenting with new forms and perspectives, and pushing the boundaries of what's considered art. Okay, now let's move to the business world and see how innovation drives progress there.
One of the biggest things in business innovation these days is Agile. It's this philosophy that emphasizes collaboration, flexibility, and delivering value incrementally. And it's based on the Agile Manifesto, which basically says that people and interactions are more important than rigid processes, and responding to change is more important than following a plan no matter what.
And there are all these different methodologies that embody this agile philosophy, like Scrum, Kanban, and Lean development.
Yeah.
They all involve working in small, cross-functional teams, short cycles, and constantly getting feedback, often directly from customers. And we're seeing companies using Agile successfully in all sorts of industries. Loxon Solutions even used Agile principles to hire people. A large electric utility finished a major project ahead of schedule and under budget using Agile. And companies like ING and Mozilla are able to get their marketing campaigns out much faster. Even in more traditional industries like aerospace and maritime logistics, we're seeing Agile being adopted.
So it's really about being able to adapt, to respond to changes quickly, and to get things done efficiently. And another big methodology that's had a huge impact on business innovation is the Lean startup, developed by Eric Ries. The basic idea is to build and test your business idea as quickly and efficiently as possible with minimal waste. The key principles are building a minimum viable product, getting feedback from customers to validate your assumptions, and being willing to change your strategy based on what you learn, what they call pivoting.
And there are so many examples of companies that have used this approach successfully. Dropbox, for example, they started with just a video demo to see if people were interested. Zappos, they actually fulfilled their first orders manually to test their business model. Airbnb, they started by renting out air mattresses in their own apartment. And Groupon, they began by offering just one deal per day. Even big established companies like GE have embraced lean startup principles.
So both Agile and Lean Startup are about being flexible, adapting to feedback, and not being afraid to experiment. Okay, now let's zoom out again and talk about something that seems to be becoming increasingly important in innovation: interdisciplinary thinking.
Yeah, this is really key. A lot of the most groundbreaking innovations happen when different fields of knowledge come together. Leonardo da Vinci is a classic example. He was a true Renaissance man, combining art and science in amazing ways.
And we're seeing this happening more and more today. Artists are using digital art, VR, AI in really innovative ways, and science and technology are being inspired by art. We're even seeing artists and scientists collaborating directly on projects involving data visualization, product design, all sorts of things. There's a project called Tree of 40 Fruit, and the University of Alabama is using techniques from intaglio printing to print flexible electrodes. And there are initiatives like the European Commission's STARTS program that are specifically designed to encourage this kind of interdisciplinary collaboration.
It's really about breaking down those traditional silos between disciplines and realizing that you can learn so much from people who are working in different fields.
Yeah.
And the convergence of science and business is another really exciting area. We see AI transforming industries like agriculture, transportation, healthcare, manufacturing. This idea of combinatorial innovation, where you take existing knowledge and technologies from different areas and combine them in new ways, is becoming more and more important. I mean, think about the iPhone or the development of smart cities.
So breaking down those walls between disciplines and bringing together different perspectives seems to be a key ingredient for driving innovation. But while we've talked a lot about success stories, it's also important to learn from the times when things don't work out.
Absolutely. Analyzing failures can teach us a lot about the pitfalls of innovation. And our sources point to some common reasons why innovations fail. Sometimes there's just not a real need in the market, or the execution is poor. Maybe the product isn't well developed, or the marketing is ineffective. Sometimes there aren't enough resources, either financial or human. And sometimes there's resistance to change within the organization. And of course, sometimes the technology just isn't there yet, or maybe the timing is just off.
There are a lot of famous examples of innovations that failed. The Segway, for instance. It faced challenges with cost, safety, and regulations. Google Glass had problems with privacy and usability. And then there's the classic example of New Coke, where they completely misjudged what customers wanted. These failures really show that having a good idea isn't enough. You need to understand the market, execute well, have the right resources, be able to overcome challenges, and get the timing right.
So by looking at both the successes and the failures, we can start to see some patterns that contribute to innovation or that hinder it.
Exactly. When we pull all this information together, some really interesting themes emerge. We see this connection between the mindset of the innovator, those personal characteristics we talked about, and the ability to effectively use structured methodologies like design thinking or the scientific method. Interdisciplinary collaboration also keeps coming up as a driver of truly groundbreaking innovation, and a clear vision, combined with that relentless perseverance, seems to be essential for innovators in any field.
And another important theme is finding that balance between having a structured approach and being flexible and adaptable. Design thinking and lean startup, they both emphasize that iterative process of learning and adapting. And time again, the sources emphasize the importance of understanding and addressing the needs of the end user, whether that's a customer, an audience, or a community.
So what we're seeing is that innovation isn't just about having a brilliant idea. It's about having the right mindset, using the right tools and approaches, collaborating effectively, understanding your audience, and being able to execute and adapt.
It's a complex process, for sure. But when all those pieces come together, the results can be truly amazing.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the main takeaway is that innovation isn't a one-size-fits-all concept. It's a combination of individual characteristics, structured methods, and navigating a complex and often unpredictable process.
And as we've seen, collaboration across disciplines can lead to some really exciting breakthroughs. So we encourage you to look for those opportunities to connect with people from different backgrounds, different areas of expertise.
And remember, a clear vision and unwavering perseverance are essential for bringing your innovative ideas to life. You're going to face challenges, you're going to encounter setbacks, but don't give up.
And it's important to be both structured and flexible in your approach. Have a plan, but be ready to adjust it as you learn and gather new information.
And never lose sight of the people you're trying to serve. Keep their needs at the forefront of your mind throughout the innovation process.
Because in the end, the most successful innovations are the ones that solve real problems and make a positive impact on the world.
And on that note, here's a final question for you to ponder. We've explored the mindset of the innovator, the importance of structured processes, the power of interdisciplinary collaboration, and the need for market awareness. Which of these do you think is the most crucial for truly groundbreaking innovation, and why? Think about it as you continue your own journey of learning and exploration. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.